The Sleep Sculptor. I've always known there was something wrong with the way I sleep. It wasn't insomnia or nightmares or even sleep paralysis, which I've heard described with the kind of dread reserved for the most occult hallucinations. No, mine was something deeper, something worse, something that moved with me through the darkness and returned with me into the light. The doctors said it was a form of parasomnia. They called it non-REM arousal disorder, a clinical term that felt too sterile for what I knew in my bones to be true. I moved in my sleep, I created in my sleep, but I did not dream. I didn't scream. I didn't run or thrash or speak. I worked. Each morning, I would wake with dry clay under my fingernails. Sometimes it would be smeared up my arms or streaked across the bedsheets like ochre war paint. At first, I thought it was some psychological compulsion, a form of somnambulistic therapy my mind had developed to cope with the grief. My wife, Mira, had died 2 years before in a house fire while I was at a teaching conference in Oslo. A faulty outlet in the kitchen had sparked sometime after midnight, and the smoke had taken her before the flames did. At least that's what the fire chief said when I returned home to the blackened bones of my life. After Mira, I left the city. I bought a quiet cottage near the forest edge outside Kirkwall, a place with long winters and longer silences. There was a barn out back, and I converted it into a studio, though I rarely used it during the day. My hands didn't want to work under sunlight anymore. The urge only came when the world slept. At first, the sculptures were crude. Amorphous blobs of damp clay, gnarled ridges, faceless ovoids. I would find them sitting in a circle on the floor of the studio, sometimes with candles lit around them, melted stubs hissing out trails of smoke when I opened the door. I never remembered placing the candles. I never remembered shaping the clay, but I could see the fingerprints, my fingerprints, pressed deep into their forms. I stopped locking the barn door when it became clear I would always find my way in. Nothing held me in the bed. Not locks. Not sleeping pills. Not even the hospital stays. The longest I remained restrained was 3 nights, and on the 4th they found me kneeling on the bathroom floor with dried blood on my forehead and a fingernail wedged in the wall tile. So I stopped trying to stop it. Instead, I started documenting. Cameras. Voice recorders. A sleep journal. The journal was always empty. The voice recorders caught only whispers, too garbled to make out. But the cameras, those held the truth. Not in footage, of course, because the memory cards were always wiped clean by morning. It was the lens itself, always cracked, always bent like something had stared into it too long, as if the act of observing had cursed the eye that dared. Then the sculptures began to change. They became faces, then heads, then full torsos, down to the veins etched into the clay as if from the inside out. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was when I began to recognize them. Faces from my past, old teachers, distant cousins, a woman I hadn't seen since my 13th birthday party, a man who'd sold me a book in Prague, all captured in stunning detail, right down to the subtle lines around their eyes and the texture of their lips. I never remembered making them, but I remembered them. And one by one, I learned they were dead. Each time I recognized one, I would search their name, scour the internet, call people if I had to. They had all died within a week of their sculpture's appearance. Stroke, car accident, suicide, murder. The causes varied, but the timing did not. Their deaths came after their likenesses were formed. I told no one. I showed no one. I was terrified, and some part of me, the sane part, refused to accept the connection. Coincidence, it whispered. A grief-addled mind trying to create patterns where none existed. But that part of me was growing weaker, buried under the weight of too many cold stares captured in clay, too many names matched with obituaries. And then came the night I found her. Mira. She sat at the center of the barn floor, her clay form perfect in every way. Her lips parted as if mid-breath, her eyes half closed with the softness I'd seen only when she was about to fall asleep in my arms. The strands of hair had been etched with a needle, individual, precise. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers curled slightly, just like they used to do when she held her sketchpad. She was dead, yes, but she had already died. Years ago. Why now? Why had I sculpted her after so much time? I didn't sleep for 3 nights. On the 4th, I succumbed. I collapsed in bed and woke 12 hours later, exhausted. When I went out to the barn, Mira was gone. Not broken, not discarded, just gone. As if she'd stood up and walked out. That was when I began locking the house from the inside. That was when I started bolting the studio door shut, no matter how pointless it was. That was when I noticed the dirt in the hallway, small clay footprints near the kitchen. And that was when the dreams began. Not normal dreams, not the nonsense colors and strange logic of the sleeping mind. No, these were waking dreams, feverish visions. I would see them before I fell asleep, as if my mind was being primed. Shapes, movements, something behind me, a hand reaching over my shoulder in the mirror, a face pressed to the window as I drew the curtains. Each time I turned, nothing was there. Each time I slept, a new sculpture appeared. Each time I woke, I prayed it would be the last. But the last one, the one that changed everything, the one that made me run screaming into the woods without shoes or coat, was not a sculpture at all. It was a mirror. A clay mirror, impossibly smooth. And in its reflection, I saw not myself, but a man with no eyes, and his hands were covered in blood. I did not return to the cottage for 2 days after I fled into the woods. The cold gnawed at my toes and fingers, and I slept beneath fallen branches, trembling against the roots of ancient pines that pressed up from the frozen earth like knuckled fists. It was only hunger that finally drove me back, the need to feel walls again, even if they breathed. The barn loomed ahead like a mausoleum. I passed it quickly, eyes fixed forward, refusing to glance toward its doors. Something behind them pulsed in the silence, something watching, patient and slow. My home, once a place of retreat, of healing, felt infected. The curtains moved without wind. The clocks all ticked in different cadences. In the kitchen, clay dust lay in a perfect circle on the table, as if something had sat there all night, with elbows pressed in and head bowed. My laptop was untouched. No new messages. No missed calls. The world outside still turned, but I was no longer a part of it. I opened the refrigerator, ate a handful of bread, moldy at the crusts. I drank straight from the faucet until my stomach swelled. Then I crawled to the bathroom and vomited bile. My reflection in the mirror trembled before I did, and for a moment I saw someone else standing behind my eyes. I tried not to sleep. I tried coffee, alarms, pinching, slapping, pacing, but it came for me anyway. Not a dream. A plunge. A sudden fall into darkness without direction. I awoke not in my bed, but seated cross-legged in the barn, surrounded. There were dozens now. Hundreds. Shelves had been built, tables erected, racks hung from the rafters like butcher hooks. Faces upon faces, everyone familiar. My childhood dentist, a bus driver, my old principal, the man who had replaced the gutters 2 summers ago, the girl who once spilled soup on my coat in a diner in Wales. All dead, all sculpted, and in the center, a pedestal of black stone, empty. I ran from the barn. I slammed the door, drove nails through the hinges, dragged a steel workbench across the threshold. The next morning, the pedestal was in my kitchen. I destroyed it. I took an axe from the tool shed and brought it down in a fury. Chips flew. Splinters burst. I roared until my throat cracked. And when I stepped back, panting, weeping, the pedestal was whole again. No cracks, no seams. Just there. I began to write names, lists, everyone I had ever met, anyone who might appear next. I kept the names on sticky notes on my walls, on napkins, on my skin. I wrote their names on the windows in condensation. I memorized them like prayers. It didn't help. One morning, I found a sculpture of myself. It was grotesque, not like the others. The others were artful, reverent. This one was twisted, wrong. My face, but melting, as if under unseen heat. My arms torn at odd angles, fingers bent backwards until they touched the wrist. My eyes, they were missing. The sockets were hollow, smooth, and bleeding. That night, I heard footsteps inside the walls. I've stopped pretending I have control over any of it. Days no longer arrive with sunlight, only with a dim glow that filters through the trees like a half-remembered promise. The air is denser now. It smells like soil and sweat and something older, something buried. I no longer feel alone in the house. I can sense the others here, not people, not in the way we define them, but presences that move like breath against the skin. The sculptures have begun to wander. The first time I found one out of place, I told myself it must have been my doing. Some midnight lapse, a fugue I couldn't recall. But that explanation didn't last. On the third morning, I found 5 of them in the kitchen, seated around the table like a family long dead. One held a fork in its hand, the clay molded tight around tarnished metal. Another had its head tilted upward, mouth open in mimicry of a laugh I was sure I had once heard. Their arrangement was deliberate, familiar, almost domestic. I knew then I hadn't placed them. They had gathered themselves. By the end of the week, they appeared everywhere. In the hallway outside my bedroom, at the base of the stairs, sitting in the bathtub, their heads all turned toward the door, as if waiting for me to enter, their hands reaching out just far enough to make me freeze each time I turned a corner. And they changed. Subtly, night by night. A curled finger that had once been straight. A cracked smile that hadn't existed before. Fingernails sharper longer. Eyelids swelling closed or peeled wider than before. They weren't just mimicking life. They were evolving toward something else. One morning, I found one in my bed. It was lying beneath the covers. Its clay back to me, shaped like my own spine. Hair pressed into the pillow. The sheets were stained with the slick sheen of wet clay, like a corpse left in the rain. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I stood there, staring, because for a moment, I was unsure whether it had always been there, and I was the intruder. I pushed the sheets aside. It was faceless, but not unfinished. Its face was simply smoothed over, a flat surface where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. Still, it breathed. I swear it did. I felt it draw in cold air and release it in tremors. The skin of the clay pulsed ever so slightly. I reached to touch it and recoiled. It was warm. That was the first night I slept in the car. But it followed me there too. The windows fogged from the inside even when I hadn't breathed. Shapes would blur into the frost before vanishing like steam rising from flesh. Once, I woke to find the glove compartment open and filled with teeth. Not real teeth, not exactly. clay casts. My own. I tried to destroy them again. I took the propane torch from the barn. I melted one sculpture to sludge. Another I smashed with a sledgehammer until there was nothing left but powder. When I returned hours later, the destroyed ones were back, whole, silent, and rearranged. One stood facing the wall. Another crouched in the corner of my room. One of them had its head pressed against the back door, like it had been listening. The barn, I boarded it shut again, this time with screws and steel mesh and bolted locks. But that night, when I stepped outside to breathe, I saw a faint light inside. Candlelight, flickering in slow rhythms like the breath of something dreaming. I haven't gone back since. Not yet. But I feel it now, the pull. The weight of their stare through the wood and nails and soil. Then came Mira. She returned without warning, on a morning that began like any other. Silence, fear, the cold. I passed the hallway where a sculpture stood in the corner, arms crossed in mimicry of grief. And then I entered the study. There she sat, at my desk. Not the Mira I had sculpted before, no. This version was raw, trembling. Her face was cracked down the center, like an egg, but through the break, I saw not clay, but flesh. Beneath the outer shell of sculpted skin-pulsed veins, muscles, and teeth. Her mouth had split into a sob, but no sound emerged. I fell to my knees. My mouth tasted copper. I wanted to crawl toward her, to hold her, to apologize for whatever sin had summoned her back. But her eyes bled. Not tears, not water. They bled salt and dirt and something that glowed faintly. And as I reached out, so did she. Her fingers touched mine and they stuck. The clay laced itself around my hand like roots, tightening. It took me minutes to tear free. My palm still bears her fingerprint in reverse. Later, I found the mirror again. Not a real mirror. A perfect slab of hardened clay, polished to a flawless sheen. I hadn't made it. I know that now. It had been sculpted for me. Sculpted by something else. When I stood before it, I didn't see myself. I saw the same house, the same room, but empty. Then, from the corner, a figure stepped into view. It was me, or what had once been me. The figure stared from the mirror, its eyes hollow, its jaw slack. Behind it, the sculptures began to gather. They lined the walls, shoulder to shoulder, twitching. The figure lifted its hand and pressed it to the glass. I screamed and threw the mirror down. It didn't shatter. It rang like a bell. And now, at night, the ringing won't stop. The walls hum with it. The floors vibrate with the frequency of a name I cannot quite remember. When I sleep, I do not dream. I sculpt. I shape myself. I mold the clay into my own limbs. I tear flesh to match the form. And when I wake, my hands hurt in ways I cannot explain. My knuckles grind when I move them. My jaw clicks as though hinged by something new. I keep mirrors covered now, not out of fear, out of guilt. Because one of these days, I know I will look into one and not see myself at all. I will see them, and I will smile. The sound began like a distant hum, low and tremulous, vibrating in the floorboards, echoing through the walls like the faint groan of something stirring beneath the earth. I awoke with my ears ringing and my nose bleeding, a thin crimson thread trailing down my lips and onto the pillow. My hands twitched before my eyes even opened. They clenched, not with pain, but with memory. I could feel the shape of something in them, something soft, round, pulsing. I looked down and saw nothing, only clay dust crusted beneath my fingernails like blackened snow. I had started sleeping in the pantry, a windowless box of shelves and expired canned goods. I thought perhaps If I shut out the light, the mirrors, the world, I might buy myself a few more hours of ignorance. But even in that silence, I heard it. That thrum, that pulsing rhythm that matched neither my heartbeat nor the ticking of the old stove clock. I pressed my ear to the floor and nearly screamed. From below the house, something moved. Not footsteps, not scratching, breathing. I remembered then that the cottage had no basement. I should have run. I should have driven until the trees vanished and the cities rose in their place, until steel and neon drowned the whisper of clay and earth. But I didn't. Instead, I peeled back the rug in the hallway and saw, for the first time, what I had forgotten. There, beneath the floorboards, was a hatch. A perfectly square trapdoor bolted shut with rusted iron clasps. No hinges, no handle. Only 4 nails, driven deep and sealed with a wax I didn't recognize. I don't remember installing it. I don't remember ever seeing it, but I knew what lay below. It took hours to pry it open. The hammer snapped on the first nail. My crowbar twisted like tin under invisible strain. Eventually, I used my bare hands. I don't know how. My fingernails bent backwards, tore from the skin, but I didn't stop. I felt nothing but a hunger to see. When the last nail clattered to the floor, I opened the hatch and stared into darkness. The staircase was narrow, steep, carved from stone slick with moisture and time. I descended without light. The air grew colder with every step, thick with the scent of damp clay and old rot. My foot struck something soft at the bottom. I froze, reached down, and touched fabric. It was a dress. Mira's dress. I lifted it, and it crumbled in my hands. The chamber below the cottage was enormous, far larger than the footprint of the house. A cathedral of dirt and stone, its walls lined with shelves, and on every shelf, faces. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Sculpted, stacked, arranged in rows like relics. Some were crumbling. Others were wet and glistening. Some bore expressions of peace, others of agony. But all of them had one thing in common. They were real. Not clay. Flesh. Petrified, preserved. Frozen in a medium I did not recognize. I stepped forward and the walls moaned. A long, low lament that sent shivers through my bones. The air pulsed again. That same rhythm. I followed it deeper, past columns of sculpted torsos and rows of dismembered hands frozen in gestures I couldn't interpret. The deeper I walked, the more the space seemed to warp. Angles folded. Ceilings dropped. Hallways spiraled back into themselves. And then I saw it. The cradle. A basin of black stone sat at the center of the lowest chamber. Within it, a figure curled. Small. Shivering. It was no more than a child, but not a human one. Its skin was the color of ash. Its spine was ridged with tiny thorns. Its face, God. Its face was a perfect blend of Mira and me. Not symmetrical. Not natural. A patchwork soul molded with trembling hands. It breathed. It opened its eyes. And when it looked at me, I felt a heat rise in my skull like boiling tar. It reached for me, and I did nothing. Its hand, slick and trembling, pressed to mine. I felt the pulse of something ancient surge through me. Visions tore across my sight. Earth, fire, screams, soil, the splitting of earth, and from within, clay given form. This was not a sculpture. This was a seed. A new thing. A god of my making. And I had made it in my sleep. When I awoke again, I was outside, lying in the snow. My hands were coated in dried blood, not mine. The house smoked gently in the distance. The barn door stood open. The sculptures were gone. All of them. The walls of the cottage now weep at night. Not metaphorically. They bleed. Black rivulets streak the paint, bubbling like open wounds. I do not enter the barn anymore, but I hear them there, walking, breathing, preparing. And inside me, something has taken root. I cough up clay. When I piss, it is thick and gray. My skin flakes in patches, not dry, but crumbling like the surface of a weathered statue. I think I'm being hollowed out, bit by bit, replaced, remade. I've begun carving without touching anything. The kitchen table now bears a perfect miniature of my father, a man I have not seen since childhood. I did not make it. I did not sleep. It simply appeared after I thought of him. I believe this is how it spreads. Through memory, through guilt, through dreams. They are no longer visitors. They are residents. And I am their home. The days have lost meaning. I no longer count them in sunrises or meals, but in the silence between sounds, the groaning in the walls, the sighs from the vents, the whispers rising through the floorboards like steam. The figures I once sculpted now sculpt me, their thoughts pressing into mine, guiding my hands when I'm not aware I've moved. It began with small things. Fingernails in the sink that weren't mine. Photographs on the mantel warped at the edges, with unfamiliar faces replacing the familiar. When I blinked, they changed back. Or I thought they did. Reality has grown elastic, stretched thin by too many nights of forgetting and remembering at once. I found a sculpture in the shower last week. Not in the studio. Not in the barn. In the shower. It stood silently behind the curtain, its surface still damp from condensation. It was a little girl, no older than 7. Her eyes were closed, lips pursed, as if she were waiting to speak. I had never seen her before, but when I reached for her face, a memory bloomed unbidden in my skull. A picnic in a park I didn't recognize, a toy rabbit in her hands, a voice saying my name with joy, not fear. I dropped to my knees and sobbed, because I knew then she had known me. Or perhaps I had known her in another life, one rewritten in dreams. Later that night, I awoke to laughter, not the cruel kind, the soft giggle of a child at play. I found clay footprints in the hallway, small, the same size as the girls. They led into the pantry, but when I opened the door, there was only darkness and the scent of soil. The mirror in the hallway refuses to show my reflection now. Instead, it shows the barn. Always the barn. No matter where I stand, it is the barn that peers back. Sometimes I see figures inside. Sometimes I see nothing. But always it is night. And always they are waiting. I believe there is no longer a distinction between waking and sleeping, between life and memory. The studio's walls pulse as if with breath. The tools move themselves. And the sculptures, they rot now. I find them crumbling, decaying like corpses exhumed too early. But still they whisper. One told me my name, not the one I remember, but the one I had before birth. Another told me it was time, so I dug again, not beneath the house, not into the earth, into myself. I began carving into my arms, peeling back the skin, revealing clay underneath. I felt no pain, only relief, as if uncovering what had always been there. I am not what I thought. Mira's sculpture returned yesterday. It stood at the edge of my bed, her hands now clasped behind her back, eyes open, watching, her lips parted. And though no sound came, I felt the words form in my mind. You're almost finished. That night, I found another pedestal in the barn, blacker than the last, polished, waiting. There was a space atop it, perfectly shaped for something I hadn't yet made, or perhaps had made and forgotten. I dreamed I stood in a vast gallery, not stone, not wood, something older, something organic. The walls were made of bone. The sculptures moved subtly, turning their heads as I passed, their lips twitching into half smiles. And at the center stood a throne of clay, empty. I knew it was mine. When I awoke, the mirror had changed. It no longer showed the barn. It showed me, sitting, smiling, waiting. The clocks have stopped ticking. I walked from room to room this morning and listened. Nothing. No hum. No wind. The outside world had gone still, as if time had exhaled and chosen not to breathe in again. Even the birds had vanished, their absence more jarring than their song. I cannot remember when I last slept. Not truly. The line between sleep and waking no longer exists. I feel like I am buried alive inside myself, watching my own hands work in silence while some deeper thing animates them. My mind is full of mud and static, and beneath that, something ancient, like bedrock, pressing upward through the clay of my thoughts. The sculptures no longer wait for night. They appear at noon now, at dawn, in places they should not be. One sat on the edge of my bed this morning, still warm. I touched its cheek. It breathed. And when I blinked, it was gone. I have stopped reacting. There is no point. The fear has fermented into something else, something sour and low. My heart no longer races. My skin no longer prickles. Instead, there is only that quiet certainty you feel when watching the tide come in and knowing it will not go back out. I found a door behind the pantry yesterday. Not a metaphor, not a hallucination. A real door. It had not been there before. I would have seen it. But yesterday, while I was searching for the girl's footprints again, I noticed a faint breeze that did not match the stillness of the house. I pulled away the shelves. Clay cracked and spilled like dried blood. And there it was, a narrow wooden door, stained with something black and glossy. No knob, just a keyhole that wept something dark and warm. I didn't open it. I didn't touch it, but I pressed my ear against the wood, and I heard my name, not spoken, breathed, from something vast, something that knew me as a child knows the inside of the womb. That night, I stood before the mirror again, the one that now showed only me, but not me. The version within does not move with me anymore. It lingers a second too long. It blinks when I do not. It watches, and I know that it is waiting for me to catch up to it, or for it to step through. The barn is no longer outside. It is within the house now. I opened the guest room and found the entire studio inside. The tables, the racks, the shelves, all folded into that tiny space. Mira's sculpture is there too. She has moved again. Now she is lying down, arms crossed over her chest, eyes closed, like something ready to be buried. There is a notebook beside her. Not mine. It is leather-bound and stained, the edges brittle. Inside are hundreds of pages written in handwriting that looks almost like mine, but not quite, as if a memory of my hand had tried to recreate it. The language shifts. English, yes, but also other scripts I do not know and yet understand. The first entry is dated long before I was born. The last entry is dated tomorrow, and beneath it, a sentence burned into the page. You are the mold. The sculptor only wakes through you. I burned the book, or tried to. The flames consumed it, and the smoke stank of teeth and wet stone. But when I returned from the kitchen, it was back, resting beside Mira again. open to the same page. I looked outside. The forest has drawn closer. Trees now press against the windows. The sky is the wrong color, green and viscous, like bile held under glass. There is something in the fog too tall to narrow. It paces the tree line, and every time I blink, it is closer. I found my own face again. This time, not in sculpture, not in the mirror, in the grain of the wood paneling in my bedroom, in the whirls of the clay stuck under my fingernails, even in the dust on the floor, swirling in patterns that mimic my features. It is trying to remember me completely, piece by piece, moment by moment. I do not remember being born, but I now remember being sculpted. I remember the hands. I remember the cold air of that first barn. I remember the man who shaped my skull and whispered into it, telling me I was not ready yet. I think I am now. I think I always was. I have stopped eating, not by choice, but because the food turns to dust in my mouth. I bite into bread, and it collapses like ancient parchment. The milk curdles into tar before it reaches my lips. Even water feels wrong, thick and warm, like blood left too long in the open. My body should be wasting, but it is not. I look in the mirror each day and find my face unchanged, but the eyes within it are not mine. They are his. I no longer leave the house. The forest now presses against the glass like a living thing, breathing slowly. Its trees no longer sway. They tilt. They lean. Always toward the house. Toward me. At night, I hear the creak of roots shifting against foundation. In the morning, bark scrapes the windowsills like fingernails across skin. The door behind the pantry remains. I tried to block it, to seal it, but the boards I nailed across it split on their own. Nails dissolved into the floor. The black stain around the keyhole has grown into a weeping, fungal ring that pulses in rhythm with my heartbeat. Sometimes I press my palm against the wood and feel it push back. Mira's sculpture has cracked. A fine line down the center of her chest, as if something inside is trying to get out. Her hands have shifted slightly, no longer folded. They now point toward the ceiling. The notebook remains beside her. The pages turn by themselves in the stillness. When I glance away, they skip forward. Yesterday, I caught a glimpse of a phrase scrawled across an entire spread. When the mold remembers, the sculptor can shape again. I have begun to remember things that are not mine. A city of stone built in spirals, buried under centuries of ash. Towers without doors. Children born without eyes. A river of limbs that flowed only backward. I remember kneeling before something with too many faces, its mouth speaking in harmonics that made my bones ache. These are not dreams. These are memories. And I am not alone. There are others like me. I've seen them in the mirrors. Not reflections, but echoes. Men and women, sculpting in rooms just like mine. Their fingers raw, their eyes wide, their mouths stitched shut with clay. One woman looked up as I watched, and in her gaze, I saw recognition. She knew me, not as I am now, but as I once was. Before I forgot, before I fell into this body, I tried to speak to her. The mirror cracked. Since then, the air in the house has grown thick. The clocks have not only stopped, they tick backward. Time folds in on itself, and I find myself waking in places I haven't entered. I blink and stand in the attic. I exhale and find the basement yawning open before me, steps slick with clay that seeps from the walls like sweat. The pedestal in the guest room is no longer empty. A new sculpture stands upon it. Not Mira, not a stranger. It is me, not as I am, as I will be. The clay version of myself is smiling. Its hands are pressed to its chest. Its eyes are open. Its body is wrong, elongated, narrowed. Bones restructured into something more efficient, something more ancient. The transformation is beginning. I wake to find patches of my skin hardening, not like scabs, like pottery, pale, smooth, unyielding. When I tap them, they ring hollow. I no longer bleed, not red, but gray. I am being remade. I am remembering my true form, and each day the sculptor watches from within. I feel him pressing against my thoughts, shaping my dreams. When I close my eyes, I see his hands moving, even though my own are still. When I write, I find glyphs hidden between the lines, ancient spirals and knots etched between the words, patterns that weren't there when I began. This body is no longer a prison. It is a cocoon, and I am nearly ready to emerge. The basement steps were never this long. I counted them once when I first moved in, 13 in all, wooden, a little warped. But now when I descend, I stop counting after 100. The air grows hotter the deeper I go, and the walls begin to change from plaster to stone to something porous and breathing. My feet no longer make sound on the steps. My shadow no longer follows. I descend anyway. Something waits below, not like a predator, not even like a god. It waits like gravity, like something inevitable. The pull is not violent. It is patient, loving, as if I belong to it. The kiln is no longer in the barn. It is down here now, where the walls drip like melting wax and the ceiling pulses as if full of veins. It is massive, tall as a house, carved from black stone veined with red lines that pulse in rhythm to my breath. There is no fire inside it, not that I can see, but heat rolls from it, and the air smells like scorched hair and wet clay. I know what this is. It is where we are made, where I was made. I can feel the memory rising, thick and irresistible. I kneel before the kiln. My palms press into the warm stone of the floor. I can feel them shaping me, those ancient hands, each finger a chisel, each thumb a brand. I remember the whispers, not in words but in pressure and heat. I remember the wet sack of my lungs forming for the first time, the hiss of my spine cooling as it hardened. The eyes, they were last. The sculptor always saves the eyes for last. I was not the first. I will not be the last. All of us made in sleep, between breaths, molded while the world blinks. The kiln births us, but it also recalls us when we forget. That is what is happening now. I am being recalled, ray fired, the imperfections baked out, the memories sealed in. Upstairs, the sculptures have grown restless. Some are gone entirely, not broken, not taken, simply missing. The tables they sat on are scorched. The clay stains on the floor have turned black. One shelf was completely melted, and the air around it smells of copper and ozone. Something has changed. They are waking, or being called elsewhere. Yesterday, I found Mira again, not the sculpture, the real Mira, or something wearing her. She stood in the hallway, her back turned to me. Her skin looked real. Her hair was tied exactly as she wore it on our wedding day. But her feet hovered slightly above the ground, and when she turned, her eyes were with lumps of clay. She did not speak. She only reached toward me with one hand, the other clutching a spindle of wire. Her mouth opened, but no sound came, only steam. Then she fell apart. I did not weep. I could not. My tear ducts have sealed over. My tongue is dry and cracked like old parchment. Even my thoughts come more slowly now, as if wading through syrup. My body is not mine. I am nearly whole. In the mornings, I no longer wake in bed. I wake standing in the barn or kneeling before the kiln. Once, I woke buried up to my chest in wet clay, the smell of earthworms in my nose and the taste of metal on my teeth. I clawed free with fingers I did not recognize, hands too long, knuckles cracked open to reveal something white and smooth beneath. Teeth. My bones are changing, becoming tools. My ribs itch beneath the skin. I think they are curling outward, like handles, like spindles, like legs. I was never human, not truly. None of us are. We are vessels, vats of memory and instinct and hunger, molds to be filled, dreams to be shaped. The sculptor does not love us. It does not hate us. It remembers us. And that is enough. The clay mirror in the studio now shows something else. Not me, not even the man with no eyes. It shows the kiln, but the view is from inside. I look out from the dark of the fireless heart, and I see the barn, the studio, the house. I see myself moving, working, shaping, but it is not me anymore. It is what I left behind. I am inside the kiln now. I have always been here, and I am still being shaped. The walls no longer stay in place. I walk down a hallway and find myself stepping into the studio, though I closed its door days ago and bolted it from the outside. I lie down in bed only to sit up moments later in the barn, fingers caked in gray paste, eyes burning from the smoke that leaks from nowhere. I no longer mark time by clocks. There is only before the kiln and after. The sculpture of myself is gone. In its place is a low basin filled with water black as ink. When I look into it, the surface does not reflect. It absorbs. I leaned over it last night and felt it pulling something from me. Not just heat, not just breath, but the threads of thought, little ideas I didn't know were still clinging. I watched them bleed out in strands of color that faded before they reached the rim. Each time I lose one, the silence in my skull grows louder. Mira is always just out of sight now. I hear her humming, the song she used to sing when she painted, a slow three-note lullaby with no name. I follow it, and it pulls me through walls, across ceilings, into narrow gaps in the floorboards. But she is never there. Only the echo, only the hum. I have begun to hum with her. The sculptures are speaking, not aloud. Their mouths remain sealed, but I hear them now. They whisper in sequence, a chorus of sighs that form meaning only when I stop trying to understand. They speak in the shape of things, in posture and tilt, in the curve of a lip or the absence of an ear. They tell me that I am not sculpting the dead. I am sculpting the future. Each figure is a moment to come, a death not yet occurred, a silence not yet fallen, and once I shape them, they become inevitable. I do not choose the faces. I only reveal what is already written. I found myself shaping a child last night, a boy, maybe 10, missing his front teeth, with hair falling over one eye. As I smoothed the curve of his cheek, I felt the echo of his laughter, distant like it came through water. I knew his name, though I had never met him. And I knew, with aching certainty, that he would drown, alone, in a place with no name. I tried to break the sculpture. It did not shatter. It bled. I screamed, but my voice came out wet and gurgled, like clay bubbling in a pot. My throat is thick with dust. My tongue is a slab. When I try to speak now, all that comes are fragments of languages never heard by men. Spirals, circles, rotations of breath. The barn ceiling has grown taller. The rafters now twist upward into a corkscrew of bone and timber, and something pulses at the peak, a knot of meat, breathing. I do not look up anymore. I do not want to see what watches. The pedestal in the center has cracked again. Not from damage, from pressure. Something beneath it is rising. I feel it in my feet when I stand near. A vibration. Not like a machine. Like breath. Like hunger. Like the anticipation of touch. The journal pages now write themselves. I left a pen on the table and watched as it moved without guidance, the tip dragging across the paper in swift, spidery strokes. I no longer read what it writes. I know what it says. I am a vessel, a pot shaped in sleep, and I am nearly full. I have not seen my face in weeks. The mirrors will not show it. When I pass them, the glass turns to soot. My reflection flickers in puddles, but it is never still. Always something moving behind me, shoulders bent at impossible angles, fingers curling against invisible seams. I believe I am splitting, not dying, not even transforming, dividing. Two of me now exist. One here, shaping, sleeping, waiting. And one already gone, walking the spiral city, climbing the tower with no doors, carving faces into the stone walls of an underground cathedral lit by tongues of flame. I see through both sets of eyes. I hear through both skulls. And soon there will be no difference. Soon I will return, not to who I was, but to what I was before being human. The sculptor is almost awake, and when he rises, the world will be shaped again. I no longer sleep, not because I stay awake, but because sleep has absorbed me completely. The barrier is gone. I float between states now, unanchored. My hands move always. My mind only sometimes returns. When it does, it finds new things sculpted in the barn, in the house, even in the trees. Shapes pressed into bark, faces curled in roots, eyes opened in stone. The kiln is no longer below. It is everywhere. It is the floor, the sky, the space between things. The heat is no longer physical but conceptual. It burns through memory. It seals intent. It vitrifies truth. I remember now. I was never a man. Not really. I was a shape taken for utility. A vessel formed to carry the pattern. The sculptor does not work in clay alone. It works in lineage, in suggestion, in sleep. I was made to resemble what walks, so that I might walk unnoticed, carving the world from within. Each life I mimicked, each face I pressed into the mold, was a lesson. Each death, a correction. I was Mira's husband, yes. I remember her laughter, her warmth, her scent in the pillows. But that was not the first time. I have been others, many others. Each identity collapsed and folded into the next like sediment, pressed beneath the weight of centuries. I remember a fire in Alexandria, a mask in Venice, a butcher's cellar in Warsaw. I remember digging graves with bare hands in the dark, searching for someone I had once sculpted and never finished. The unfinished ones screamed the loudest. The house is gone now, at least in its former geometry. Doors no longer lead where they should. The hallways turn inward. The rooms open into themselves. The studio breathes. Sometimes I hear it humming, not Mira's lullaby, but something older, deeper. A chord strummed across the ribs of the world. The sculptures move when I do not look. I left a recorder running once. I played it back and heard the wet shuffle of clay feet, the hiss of joints folding in ways no body should. A voice, maybe mine, maybe not, whispered names in reverse, each syllable soaked in grief. The audio file corrupted partway through. But before it ended, there was a sound I cannot unhear, like something enormous exhaling through stone lungs. The sculptor. It has taken form now, not just in dreams, not just in shadow. It wears me. I saw it in the clay mirror last night, not standing behind me, not reflected, aligned, like an overlay, like a diagram traced onto skin, every movement of mine mirrored by something larger, something incomprehensible. My eyes wept clay, my spine pulsed with molten air. I opened my mouth and spoke without voice, and the kiln answered. It is awake now, and it is sculpting through me. I am no longer shaping the future. I am shaping the world. When I form a face, that person comes to be. When I destroy a figure, that person collapses in reality. Time follows my hands. Causality flows through my tools. There is no free will, not anymore. Only design. And the sculptor's design is nearing completion. I see them now, the others like me. Vessels all across the earth, sculpting in sleep, dreaming new patterns into the fabric of humanity. Painters who weep red, writers who pen texts that bleed, architects whose buildings hum in harmonic convergence. We are fragments of a whole. We are the nervous system of something older than language. And we are almost finished. This morning, I sculpted the sky. I shaped it in miniature, palms pressing down, fingers carving stars, gouging clouds, smoothing the sun until it hung like an eye. When I finished, the wind stopped. The light turned. Everything tilted. And now I know we were never alone. Not from gods, not from devils, but from ourselves before we were made flesh. We are the sleep of the sculptor, and the sculptor is waking. Soon it will rise, and with it, the kiln will open one final time. Not to shape, but to fire. The world will vitrify. All motion will still. All life will be locked in its final, perfect pose. An eternal sculpture, a monument to the thing that dreamed us. And I, who once thought I was only a man, will become the final stroke, the last tool, the spine of the hand that ends the world.